When I think of Altenew, I think of their catchphrase, craft your life. To me, this means I can use my Altenew crafting supplies to make beautiful items around my home and artistic space. In this perfect pairing, let's take a look at 3 easy ways you can make something other than cards and truly craft your life. I recently got this cute little peperomia obtusifolia, and while she isn't ready to pot yet, I wanted to find a personalized way to make a simple terracotta pot. I won't use this pot as a growing pot, instead it's a decorative cover for this nursery pot. And this decorative reusable pot will also prevent me from getting soil all over the floor when watering my mini fiddle leaf fig. There are a few air drying clays or clays that don't require kilns like the plasticine clays. I opted for air dry since I figured it would be the easiest for me. I didn't have to bake anything at home. There are other air dry clays that come uncolored, so you can go with whatever you want. I was able to pick this up at my big box store for crafty items, but I know many of these can be found online if you don't have access to a big box store that sells these air dry or plasticine clays. So those are 2 different clays that you can use without a kiln. So before I start anything, I have a rough estimate of how big my grow pot is here. So it's about 4 inches diameter. And with math, I'm just gonna do a little bit of calculation to find out the circumference. So what I'm going to do is lay down my silicone stamping mat just to make sure that everything stays clean. And then it looks like the height of my pot is about 4 inches. So 13 inches wide, or I'll go longer, and then about 4 inches tall, or slightly taller than that. So I don't have a lot of clay making material, so I'm just going to use what I have on hand. And I hope that you do too. I'm going to cut off a 2-inch wide block of this air dry clay just to see how much this makes me. And I'm just using the edge of a ruler as my clay cutter. So like I said, I don't have a lot of clay making materials. So I'm kind of just working with what I have to roll this out. I'm just going to knead a little bit just to get it into a flat form. And then I just have the tube from this deco foil. I use it as my rolling pin. So after getting this as smooth and even as I can, I am going to try to keep this consistently moist. And just to keep in mind, even though the pot size is 13 inches in circumference and 4 inches tall, I am going to go slightly larger than that. And once I'm done using my Altenew items to create a more personalized look for this pot, then I'll go ahead and trim it down to size. So the next thing I'm going to grab is the March 2022 Craft Your Life Project Kit Dynamic Blooms. And all I'm going to need for this project is the embossing folder. I thought the nice little motifs would look really nice and interesting if repeated along the terracotta pot. So you can do this technique with any of your 3D embossing folders from Altenew, but I'm looking for the side that is raised. So in this case, it's the non-text side of the Dynamic Blooms 3D embossing folder. So I'm going to use this side here, and I'll use it as a stamp to create texture onto the terracotta. So you'll see when you're getting a good impression into the clay, because you will see through it. And just in case, I'm going to add a little bit of water to the surface of the embossing folder just so nothing really sticks, just in case. And this introduces a light bit of texture. I'm going to press pretty hard because the surface of my clay is pretty uneven. If you had a rolling pin, you might get a much better impression than I will, but I kind of like the rustic look I'm going to get from this. And that's the first impression. So I don't need to repeat this horizontally. I can shift it just to get a little bit more variation in the repeat. So again, I'm using my Altenew Fine Mister bottle to lightly moisten the surface of the embossing folder. And then I'll firmly press this into the surface of the clay. Then I'll repeat this on the left side of my center guide. Luckily, soap and water takes the air dry clay right off, so no need to worry about ruining your Altenew supplies. Alright, now that I have the texture in my clay. Let's see if you can see that a little bit better if I move that around a little bit. Now I can trim this to size. I'm just going to use my longer steel ruler to cut this down. So I'll remove all of this excess clay. Alrighty, now I should be able to roll this up into a cylinder. So I found this old tin vase, and I'm hoping that it'll help combat a little bit of the sagging from the weight of the air dry clay. And I also used it as a form to help press the seam where I have the two ends joined together. To make the base, I've rolled the offcuts from this main piece into a fairly uniform shape with the tools that I have, and I've overestimated the diameter when placing this back down on top of the clay. And I'll just use my Altenew bone folder to make a tracing of the circumference of the base. And I don't want to use any blades on this because this is on top of my silicone stamping mat. So I'm going to use the smallest knife in the Altenew mixed media palette knife set. That's the number 2. And this is what I'll use to cut the clay. And now that I have the side and the base made, I'm going to let both dry overnight. So now it's the evening of the next day, and before I left for work this morning, I removed the liner metal pan that I had on the inside of this to give it some structure, just so that the inside would dry as well. And then I removed this one from the silicone stamping mat, just so that the bottom side could dry as well. And then I let that air dry continuously, and now at the end of the day, my pot has dried back nicely. I'm taking the jet black mixed media ink and a paper towel, and I'm going to roughly rub the pad around the surface just so that I can catch the high points of my jar. And then with a dry paper towel, I'm buffing the mixed media ink just to soften that up a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of jet black to the base as well. Before I put the two sides together, I decided to add a little bit of Altenew Enchanted Gold Pigment Ink to a few of the high spaces around the sides. So just like the mixed media ink, I'm just randomly rubbing this pigment ink onto some random areas on the side of my terracotta pot. And after gluing the base to the side of my terracotta pot, now it's ready for a plant. I'll show you what the final product looks like in my greenhouse in the next few clips here. So you'll see this size terracotta pot with a 13-inch circumference holds a grow pot that's about 4 inches in diameter. And I think its eccentric design really mingles well with the other terracotta pots I have in my plant collection. So I'm really glad I'm able to make something that really suits the decor for my indoor jungle. This next item I'm going to start stamping on is another one I found at my local big box store. Along with the air dry clay, I saw these little collections of charcuterie boards. And this one is untreated. According to the label, it was beechwood. And this is unvarnished, which is important for this next technique for getting stamps onto the surface. To keep things simple, I'm going to bring back out the Craft Your Life project kit in Dynamic Blossoms. And instead of just using the embossing folder like I did before, this time I'll use the main stamp image. I'm going to hold my board to my craft mat with a little bit of satin tape. And I found that stacking both my stamp positioning tools helps me pick up the stamp with the reverse side of the lid so that I have a consistent hinge should I need to repeat stamping onto the surface of my board here. And now that I've picked an orientation for my blossoms, I'm going to keep both of my stamp positioning tools where they're at and swing my stamp positioning door closed. I'm going to bring that jet black mixed media ink back. This ink is better for porous surfaces like wood. And that's my first outline layer on here. To stamp the rest of my flowers, I'm going to use the Glacier Caves family of mixed media inks. So that's Arctic, Caribbean Sky, Persian Blue, and Sapphire. So I started this layer with Arctic, then I stamped the A through E2 layers in Caribbean Sky. On my stamp positioning tool, I have the lowercase A1 through E1 layers, and I'll use Persian blue to stamp these little leaflet images. And then to finish off the stamp layering, I'll use a sapphire on this last detail image for the stem and some of these smaller leaves. Now before I put this whole thing away, I've aligned the outline stamp again, just as a finishing detail to stamp over some of these lighter areas where the ink settled on top. And instead of stamping the outline in jet black again, I'm just going to use sapphire, and that'll give me a much more monochrome effect. Because of the water-soluble properties of jet black mixed media ink, I can press the ink pad onto an acrylic block, dilute it with a little bit of water, and then add splatters throughout the board, just like I would on a card, just to help finish off that board. And after waiting for the board to get touch dry, and then heat set with my heat tool, this piece is now dry to display. I wouldn't recommend using it as a charcuterie board anymore. I really did this for aesthetic purposes, just to add a little bit of crafty decor to my studio. But yeah, once you use your mixed media ink on a porous surface like wood, this becomes another great way to add some crafty decor to your studio. So for the first time ever, Altenew released a fabric collection called the Dreamy Bouquet fabric collection. And I don't know if you know this, but aside from card making, a lot of card makers are also sewers, seamstresses. Now, I don't do a lot of sewing myself. I do have a sewing machine, but I use it mostly for home decor projects, of course, like with everything that I've showed you so far in this video. And with that collection, this is all I have left for scraps on that recent collection. And what I'm going to do with both of these scraps is to basically make a throw pillow. So obviously these two scraps of fabric are not enough to make a throw pillow for an 18 by 18 inch pillow form. So I've already cut into pieces an old bed sheet of mine that I don't really care about. It's lost its sort of softness. And in order to marry all of these pieces together, when I sew my 18 by 18 inch envelope pillow form, I decided to borrow these motifs from the Enchanted foliage and stamp them onto my plain white scrap of fabric. So I'm bringing back the older leaf clusters stamp set, and again, just as before, I'll be using the mixed media inks in the Greenfield family, so that's Frayed Leaf, Evergreen, and Forest Glades, to stamp these images onto my fabric. So I've already washed and ironed this piece of fabric, so now I'm ready to stamp. So I've just randomly laid all the leaf cluster images onto my fabric, and I'm going to do the same trick as earlier to ensure I get solid impressions on the fabric. So I've transferred all the stamps to the lid of my stamp positioning tool, and then I can ink up the stamps, and I'm kind of doing so at random, layering the inks directly onto the stamps, and then I'll press these images into the fabric. Now, I kind of don't mind that these effects are really subtle. In fact, I don't want it to overtake both of these samples of fabric, but I thought it would be nice to have a continuous pattern on this plain white piece. So now that I have all of these images on my stamp positioning tool, I'm just gonna randomly pick another orientation for my fabric and essentially repeat this process. So now I'll apply ink in Forest Glades and in Frayed Leaf to the surfaces of these stamps, and I'm not really caring if they overlap because they do on the other sample of fabric. And I'll keep repeating this pattern of rotating my fabric into a random orientation and repeat stamping all of these images that I have on here onto my plain piece of fabric. To fill in a few of the empty spaces, or spaces I feel like there needs to be more foliage, I'm just using an acrylic block to stamp in some of those open areas. And overall, I like the fill of this piece of fabric. So in order to seal this, I'm going to take this entire piece to my ironing board, and I'll press over in sections on top of a paper towel to heat set all of the images on my fabric. So after heat setting my DIY patterned fabric, I'll start piecing together my throw pillow using the scrap pieces of the Dreamy Bouquet collection that I have. And I'm not much of a sewer, I do it for the sake of putting two pieces of fabric together. I'll fast forward quite a lot through the sewing process. I'm following a very basic envelope pattern that I've sort of made up myself. But it's just a culmination of different sources that I've found throughout the years that has sort of worked for me. But anyway, I'll show you the final result once I start putting all of these pieces together. So after stitching the front panel together, I added this vinyl plante, just using my electric CNC cutting machine. I ironed that on top of my front panel, and this is my final 18 by 18 inch pillow cover. I was able to stamp on some fabric using the mixed media ink, and I also used some of my scraps from the recent Altenew fabric release, Dreamy Bouquet. And now I have something else a little bit more personal for my Crafty studio. My series encourages you to shop your existing Altenew stash and rekindle their love with newer releases. Perfect Pairings with Jaycee airs on the Altenew channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month. Please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning in to this perfect pairing episode with me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hello there! Are you still looking for project ideas and card making inspirations? Well, if you are, look no further. We have tons here at the Altenew YouTube channel. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any videos that we do upload. To help keep your creative juices flowing, we have a couple more videos that you can watch here too. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again really, really soon. Bye bye!